Russia has returned 3 naval ships it captured from the Ukraine last year. The handover took place off the coast of the disputed Crimea region. At the time of the seizure, Russia accused the Ukrainian Navy of illegally entering its waters. This move is the latest effort to ease tensions between the two countries before a peace summit next month. They've been locked in conflict since Russia annexed Crimea in 2014. For more on the story, let me draw in our correspondents, Nick Connolly in Kiev and Yuri Reshetto in Moscow. Welcome to both of you. Let me start with you, Yuri. Why has Moscow given the warships back to Ukraine now?
Well, we can assume, Amrita, that the Russian authorities decided to return the ships as a sign of goodwill before the so-called Normandy summit, which is scheduled for December 9th in Paris, in France. That's at least how Russian media outlets are reading this. The summit will bring together the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, France and Germany and aims to resolve the conflict in eastern Ukraine, or at least achieve some progress in this issue. It's the first time in 3 years that this kind of face-to-face meeting will happen at the top level, so hopes really are high that something may be achieved. At the same time, DW spoke to the spokesperson of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, today earlier. She didn't officially associate the return of ships with the upcoming Normandy summit. The Russian Foreign Ministry in Moscow, in its official statement, emphasized that these ships are material evidence in the ongoing criminal case here in Russia on the alleged illegal crossing of the Russian border. And Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov repeated the Russian line that these Ukrainian ships violated the state border of the Russian Federation.
Nick, turning to you in Kiev, a gesture of goodwill from Moscow. To what extent is this a victory for Kiev? It's been pushing to get these ships back for quite a while.
Amrit, I'm not sure this is a victory in terms of military significance. These ships are pretty worthless. They are largely, glorified Coast Guard ships. But this is definitely a sign of goodwill. This is a step towards creating greater openness at these talks, as Yuri mentioned, that are planned for early December. I think the bigger step in terms of Ukrainian public awareness of the issue was the return of the sailors who had been taken into custody at the time that these ships were impounded November last year. And that really was a real moment here in Ukraine. Huge public attention, huge emotion riding high as those people touched down in Kiev. So this is part of these steps to really change the tone of discussion between Kiev and Moscow, but in terms of military balance, it's not really a significant step. This is all about the atmospherics.
Okay, talking about atmospherics, what is the situation like in the Donbas region after 5 years of conflict, Nick?
Well, this is a frozen conflict geographically, but that doesn't mean that the shooting doesn't continue every day. Soldiers die regularly, are heavily severely wounded. Civilians are still dying, albeit less often than was the case a few years ago. There have been some positive signs in recent weeks and months. There's been partial troop withdrawals in very small parts of a 400-kilometre long front line, where troops that maybe were a couple of hundred metres away from each other are now a kilometre apart. But this is all still first steps. But there is seemingly a willingness to engage with the other side and to try to trust each other after these years of conflict.
And Yuri, in Moscow, do you get the sense that there is the political will in Moscow to find a way to end the conflict in eastern Ukraine, perhaps at that summit next month that you mentioned?
Well, considering the positive dynamics or development, Nick in Kiev mentioned it, in Russian-Ukrainian relations, there are grounds to be cautiously optimistic, I think. Russia emphasizes again and again that the Donbas conflict is an internal Ukrainian issue and that Russia is just an observer. At the same time, Mamrita, however, Moscow complains that Ukraine, at least in the past, has done nothing to resolve the problem. That was especially true when Petro Poroshenko was president in Ukraine. Now that Ukraine has a new president, Mr. Zelensky, perhaps Moscow too could move towards Ukraine and really show some willingness to end the conflict.
Right, Yuri Reshetto in Moscow and Nick Connolly in Kiev. Thank you both very much for your perspectives.